Countdown to Eternity starts now.
Well, hello, my dear brothers and sisters. I want to welcome you to another episode of Countdown to Eternity. Tom Hughes is still out of the country, but guess what? You're in great hands because I am with the great Andy Woods. I am super excited about our conversation. It's going to be a good one, but before we get into it, Andy, how are you?
I'm doing well, James. Coming to you from Alvin, Texas, taking a little R&R this weekend before we send our daughter off, who just graduated from high school, to college. And so this is our one last family reunion before the real world hits.
Okay, so you guys heard it here on the show. Pray for Andy's daughter because this is a very important time. So obviously, I know she's going to get a healthy education, but that's always an important time for folks. So that's something definitely we'll be praying for. Bro, we got to talk about some craziness, okay? There are so many things happening in the Middle East right now. At the time that we are recording this, we are bordering on Tish B'Av. By the way, one thing that I should probably mention is at the actual time we're recording this, it is August 13th in Israel. It is the evening time. We don't know if attacks have are going to happen within the next 15 hours or so. By the time you're watching this, that may have very well have happened. We don't know. We see all kinds of headlines that are coming up that are absolutely crazy. When you read them, we're beginning to see the United States supposedly turn a corner with respect to how it chooses to support Israel for funding for their weapons. You've got U.S. officials who have just put out a warning to everybody in the diplomatic corps that basically says Iran's attack on Israel is imminent and will likely happen within the next few days. So by the time you're hearing this, it may have already happened. You've got lots and lots of instances of blatant and ugly anti-Semitism that we're seeing on the rise per what we should expect from Zechariah chapter 12. And then going on to see what's happening in Europe right now and the craziness with the loss of free speech. And then even as insane as the World Health Organization wanting to put together an emergency meeting over a new sickness, which we might even not have the time to talk about. And then to take it even a step further, we continue to get into a multiple, or how about we just say this, a myriad of different types of crises. What do they call it? What was the term that the New World Order used before? The poly crisis. We're dealing with a whole bunch of polycrisis nonsense going on, and we are basically the world is being set up for what we know is going to happen in the last days. So I just thought that maybe I would cut you loose to just talk about what the Bible tells us to expect in these last days. We talk about it. I know Zechariah 12 tells us lots about this. Zechariah 14 tells us a lot about this. We go all throughout the scriptures. Lots of things are very eminent. Matter of fact, there's a lot of conversation right now amongst military officials that are beginning to bring Syria into play, which of course causes a lot of people to be thinking about Isaiah 17. So as you can see, there's a lot going on, bro, and I haven't even literally scratched the surface. What say you about all of this?
Well, I guess the thing that I'm looking at is the concept of confluence. It's multiple prophetic streams coming together simultaneously in concert. And you just mentioned several of them. Let's start with Iran potentially going to war with Israel. That's Ezekiel 38 and 39, stage setting for that, which predicts Persia, amongst others, coming against Israel in the last days. You mentioned Zechariah 12. If you look at verse 2, 2,500 years ago, God predicted that Jerusalem would be a cup of trembling that would cause the nations to reel. And that's where all the action is right now. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do with Israel, what to do with Jerusalem, which is putting the nations in a state of perplexity, consternation. So that prophetic stream is live and moving. And then you mentioned the polycrisis of the World Health Organization, the late September United Nations meeting that's coming up, We remember what Rahm Emanuel said, the former chief of staff in the Obama administration, never let a good crisis go to waste. And what he meant by that is it's an opportunity to make the government bigger. Well, there he was speaking of a economic crisis. What do you do with an economic crisis, a war, potential war, a health crisis? How many more can we mention here? The alleged, climate change crisis, which I think is not a real crisis, but they've convinced the world that it is a real crisis. What do you do with all the Japanese stock market going down, our stock market going down, inflation, stagflation? What do you do with all of these things coming together simultaneously? I mean, is that not a perfect rubric for we need global governance to, solve these global crises, polycrisis? That fits with Bible prophecy because Daniel 7 verse 23 says the final form of Gentile dominion that will exist before Jesus returns in his second advent will be one world tyranny. You see that in Revelation 13, 16 through 18, Revelation 17, verse 15, etc., etc. So I guess what I'm seeing, James, is a lot of these prophetic streams of thought, Zechariah 12, Ezekiel 38, Daniel 7, Revelation 13, all coming into existence at the same time, revolving around the nation of Israel. And God, in his prophetic word, told us this day would come. And lo and behold, Brother James, here we are. And what's so interesting about it is most of the professing church could care less about it. And yet we're living in the most exciting time ever.
Oh, it's amazing. And then I want to add to something because this is like I think a really, really special thing to be looking at the time that we're living in right now. And then you have what I believe to be the largest terrorist organization in the world, the United Nations, who are having another assembly. I believe from the top of my head, I think it's the 79th assembly where they're getting together. And many people have already heard this phrase that I have used on this channel. I know that you've talked about it on multiple occasions, called the Summit of the Future, which of course, this is this new pact that they're looking to sign in just over a month from now, from the time that you're watching this recording, which in essence will put into fruition this whole kind of world governance infrastructure in response to this polycrisis. By the way, this is interesting to talk about because this term polycrisis was actually introduced at UN's COP, I believe COP 28 actually is when they first introduced it. It wasn't 27, it was 28. And they had workshops concerning it. It's been something that they've been talking about, and they've been very open and vocal about utilizing or putting into play this polycrisis in order to bring substantiation for the necessity of a one world government or a new world order. And it's interesting how now these nations are all getting together, ready to sign this. And what's scary about this is none of these are elected officials. And even the elected officials that do participate are going in line with these power brokers who are looking to create this literal new world order. And when you look at Revelation chapter 6 and you read about these first four seals, I find it interesting how in one of the seals that we talk about, the rider of the black horse, it talks about economic failure that comes in after war. And in that economic failure, we're pretty much told to don't touch, leave alone the oil and the wine, which would seem to imply that you've got a ruling class that exists amongst this group. And I mean, bro, totalitarian ruler coming into play. You've got not only the totalitarian ruler, you've got war that comes in, the war machine has to feed it, economic crisis with the preservation of a ruling class, and then you have death. And this has been a pattern that we have watched emerge over the last several hundred years. And it would seem as though every single time that pattern has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, I believe the devil has been looking to see if this person who's raised up to lead up this totalitarian ruler would be the final Antichrist. I think he's looking for it again and again and again and again. Now, what's interesting is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 actually tells us, and by the way, you're the one that changed my mind on this. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 tells us that we can't even see or have the Antichrist revealed to the world until Christians are gone. And what's interesting is we are the preserving influence. So imagine what the first four seals of the book of Revelation, chapter 6, are going to look like when Christians are no longer the preserving influence. You want to talk about significant. Heck, in the last couple of centuries, we've seen 200 million die as a result of totalitarian rule. Imagine 3 billion as a result of the totalitarian ruling of the final Antichrist. And we're seeing it. It's coming to that. It's literally going into that place. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, and if I could just toss in one more thing to your very good list there, is we're in an election year. And so, and one of the guys running, although he's certainly not a perfect person, is anti-New World Order.
Oh, yeah.
He's a nationalist. He wants to make decisions that are in the best interest of the country rather than what's in the best interest of the globe. And this is a guy I believe that they tried to assassinate. I think you can link this would-be assassin to him, the would-be assassin actually being used in an advertisement for BlackRock, a globalist corporation, in an education piece going back a couple of years, 2022, if memory serves. So the globalists, I believe, tried to take Trump out, and I think they've played their hand or demonstrated that they're willing to do anything to stop this man from returning to the White House, including exasperating a lot of the things that you're talking about.
100%.
The September UN power grab that's coming. By the way, they're doing that without any consultation whatsoever with the United States Constitution, which demands a 2/3 Senate, those senators present, supermajority to approve a treaty. Well, let's just call it something other than a treaty. Let's call it an accord, like the Paris climate accord. Let's call it a deal, like the Iran deal. And what they're plotting to do in New York in September is literally take away the sovereignty of the United States. And this power grab is taking place before a very important election where a nationalist is running. And they're just redefining it as an accord or an agreement so they can get around, what the Constitution requires in terms of, 2/3 Senate supermajority approval. So all of that to say, Brother James, let's just sum it up this way. We're living in extraordinary times where all of these prophetic themes are coming together simultaneously, in our day and time period.
Yeah, unbelievably right. I think you're correct. And what's interesting is when you start to connect the dots, then it really gets interesting because what's unique here is that, like you said, we're watching this, for lack of a better term, this conglomeration of events. We're watching this massive, ugly construct beginning to form. And then now, as you mentioned, elections all over the world. Mm-hmm. By the way, this year, we will see more elections around the world than we have, I think, in the last 50 or 60 years, just based on the way everything has timed up. I forgot what that exact number was, but it's a pretty remarkable number. And when you look and see how many regions, how many areas stand to be changed in a remarkable way. And then when you look and you consider the picture of what Nigel Farage is doing and the hand that he's beginning to have, of course, for those of you that might not remember, he's the person who engineered Brexit. And to see the kind of effect that that's had on Europe, as a matter of fact, what's really interesting is since Brexit, we have seen the introduction of at least 70 Sharia law courts into Britain and in the UK. And what continues to be a problem are the freedom of speech issues that we see happening again and again and again. And they are a significant problem in the UK. And this is something that you were just talking about recently. You want to talk about that a little bit? Because that's going to change the face of everything that happens in Europe. And I say this, When the freedom of speech goes away, that's when war starts. When people can't talk and there's no free exchange of ideas or conversations, you open up the door for violence. And that's what happens here. And I think that's what they want. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's interesting the Daniel 7, verse 23 passage, Daniel 2, verse, 40 through 43 passage. I mean, those are all talking about a one world tyranny. But if I'm understanding it right, it's Eurocentric. It arises out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome, which is what Europe is. It's the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. And so those passages are also talking about not just global governance, but tyranny. So, with all of that being said, I find it very interesting that Labour has just won a big election in the UK and pushed the UK in a leftward direction. And look what their leadership is doing. Look what their priorities are. I mean, they want to clamp down on anybody that says anything against the government narrative on social media, and they just call it hate speech. Whatever that means. You're engendering hate. So that's just kind of an excuse to allow the government to censor anything. And it's not just censoring things, it's arresting people. I saw Nigel Farage on an interview recently, and he was talking about how he could be arrested. If you post
Yep.
anything that goes against the government narrative, if you do the little thing, or if you repost, you're subject to not just censorship, but arrest. And of all of the crime problems happening in the UK, this is how the Labour Party is spending its resources, to purge social media. But I think it fits with our understanding of a Eurocentric, sort of New World Order, which will be very totalitarian. And every totalitarian understands that the first thing you have to shut down when you move into totalitarianism is you have to shut down free speech. I mean, free speech is the lifeblood of a free society, and you have to take that away from people. And once you take that away from people, the powers that be can push the population into any narrative it wants to push them into because there's no countervailing influence. And so that's why I think another issue amongst others that we've talked about that's now coming into existence is this blatant violation of freedom of speech by Labour in the UK.
Yeah. And it's a big deal. And it's funny because right before we started the recording, before we hit the record button, your wife said something that was really critical here. And it's something that we should all be mindful of. And I mean, because we were talking about the free speech problem and we only spent 30 seconds talking about it, but she jumped in right away and she goes, yeah, that means religious persecution. It means that people are not going to be able to freely worship the Lord as God intended for them to worship. And there's a bigger significance there. And she kind of sort of hit a nerve in me when she said that, because this is what happens when you remove the church from being able to open their mouths and have the voice that they have in society. You also open up the door for a significant amount of fast tracking that happens in the realm of tyranny. And that's what we saw in the United States of America. When pastors chose to shut down their churches because of the fear of death, the shutting down of their churches basically opened up a door for all kinds of wickedness to come in to the government. And there was an oppressive mechanism that was deployed in rapid fashion that allowed so much evil to just step right in. And we're dealing with the effects of it right now. We're actually looking at the pain that's come as a result of it. And I think that that's a big part of the devil's tactic. His enemy, or his tactic is to affect within the church a sense of lame duckness, for lack of a better term, right? Like he doesn't want the church to be effective, because when the church is effective and do what they're supposed to do, well, then this stuff gets put on hold. And I think that that's really, really interesting. I think that's why they're very angry with Donald Trump and why they're trying to chase him down, because he's been very vocal about the responsibility that churches have to get involved in these matters. And I mean, Yuval Harari actually just recently made a statement where he said we can't let Trump get elected, because if we do, then the globalism variable is dead. We don't have a chance. But to take that just one step further, this has nothing to do with Trump as much as it has to do with allowing the church to do what the church is called by God to do. And when the church can't do it, then the door for tyranny completely is open. And we welcome the loss of freedom when we choose to say we're going to ignore the originator of freedom, which is God himself.
Yeah, I was listening to, or we had as a guest speaker not too long ago at our church, one of the great defenders of religious freedom from the legal standpoint, a man named Kelly Shackelford. I'm sure you have heard
No
of him and
way.
know who
You
he
had
is.
you had Kelly Shackelford at your church?
Well, a
I'm
couple of years
so
back.
I'm so
Yeah.
like jealous. That would have been amazing to have him. Oh wow. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, he was there, and he made a really interesting point, about freedom of religion. He says when these totalitarians take control, I mean, the first thing they shut down is freedom of religion. Because once freedom of religion goes, the rest of what anyone calls free speech, topples very, very easily. And when you think about it, this hate speech concept, think about how that would restrict us as Christians. I mean, we can't condemn homosexuality like the Bible tells us to. Love the sinner, hate the sin, because that's hate speech. We can't preach John 14, verse 6, where Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me, because that's exclusionary against other religions. And so the more this hate speech mantra is allowed to take root, in the UK and even here in the United States, the more you can expect our freedoms, from in the pulpit to disintegrate, where we could actually be facing censorship, actual jail time for teaching basic Christianity 101.
That it's I have been kicking and screaming about this. I have been talking about this so much. I know you have been. We've been making it very, very clear. When the church is disabled from doing what it's called to do by God, then you have the ushering of all of this stuff in. As a matter of fact, the Bible makes it very, very clear. The Bible tells us that as we're walking filled with the Spirit, we function as the preserving influence in this world. And when we choose to just simply say, I give it up, I no longer want to walk in my role, then we have this significant problem. And I think it's really, really important. By the way, this is interesting. I'm just wrapping up the book of Revelation with our church on Sundays. And we're in the last part of Revelation 22, where I think God is offering words of comfort to the believers. He's giving us words of hope. He's telling us all kinds of really exciting things about the things we should expect in the future. But the one thing that I think is remarkable about the book of Revelation is the resistance that even the church has to understanding it, to reading it. One of my favorite Bible college professors, who was discipled directly by J. Vernon McGee, told me that he'll never teach you the book of Revelation because of how difficult it is. And I've been saying this to people a lot. The reason why the book of Revelation doesn't get touched by a lot of people isn't because of its difficulty. It isn't because of trying to discern the difference between what might be metaphorical or the use of an allegory or any other type of language that exists. It all relates to the fact that at the very beginning, specifically in Revelation chapter 1, verse 3, and at the very end, Revelation 22, I want to say like verse 7, we are promised, we are told that God will bless us if we read and we heed the words of that book. And I think that we have an enemy that is trying to keep us from doing it. Now, I bring all of that up because Revelation lays out for us what it's going to look like when tyrannical government takes over, especially from this area of Rome, and how important it is for us as believers to be motivated in how we live today based on what we know is going to happen in the future. When you look at the coming up city of Babylon, and when you look at all the things that surround us or will surround us soon, the church has to act. We're in the most exciting time to be alive, and I think Revelation lays that out for us. But people who don't want to read it are people who are going to miss out on the blessing of what it provides for us to be able to live the way that God wants us to live. And I think that's that's something that we have to like really focus on right now, because we're losing it. And in doing so, we're just giving the enemy ground, especially in the days that are the most exciting to be alive.
Yeah, it's like driving in a car. The windshield's very large. Your rearview mirror is very small. So if you spend most of your time looking in your rearview mirror, you're going to crash. You got to be looking forward to where you're going. And the only way to look forward spiritually is through the prophetic scripture, the most prominent of which would be the book of Revelation. And, this issue that you're raising here about pastors not wanting to teach that, I've faced that my whole life with pastors who have told me that same thing. In fact, even the great Martin Luther, the spearhead of the Protestant Reformation, he didn't even believe that the book of Revelation was an inspired book. He thought it was uninspired. He thought it was non canonical. He kind of treated it like he treated the book of James, which he, I think, incorrectly interpreted as contradicting his doctrine of sola fide, faith alone. And he kind of put James in the appendix of the Luther translation and called it an epistle of straw. Well, that was sort of light gloves treatment compared to what he did with the book of Revelation. I mean, he called the book of Revelation among the uninspired books of the Bible. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Satan's doom and demise is spelled out very aggressively and specifically in the book of Revelation. And if anyone doesn't want us to read the book of Revelation, it's the devil himself. Because as my friend or our friend Olivier Melnick says, Satan has read his retirement plan and he doesn't like it very much. So he's worked in history to obscure the meaning of the book of Revelation in the evangelical mind.
Yeah, and it's something that we really have to ask God for wisdom as spiritual leaders to help people wake up concerning. I think the summary of where we're going with the time that we've spent together today is um, it really centers around the fact that God is setting the stage. God is dramatically setting the stage for what we know is spoken to us concerning the end times. It's such a remarkable picture. I think more than ever now we have to recognize it. We have to recognize that God is setting the prophetic stage. Look, Andy, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to share the last word. I always do. So I'm giving it right to you. A lot we talked about today, a lot of great stuff.
Well, when you go to see a basketball game, when someone comes out and starts sweeping the, gym floor and someone pulls out the bleachers and the bleachers start getting filled up with fans and someone starts selling popcorn and the teams come out and start doing their layup drills and the captains have their meeting with the referee at the beginning of the game. You know that something's ready to start. There's a contest. You can't have a basketball game unless you have the stage set. And why would that be any different for the end times? I mean, we're about ready to see the contest of the ages that God said would come thousands of years ago in His Word. And we're seeing the stage aggressively set for that scenario. I'm not a date setter. You're not a date setter. We don't know how long the stage is going to continue to be set. But boy, it sure to me looks like some big pieces are moving around. And the tribulation period is coming fast. And as the old saying goes, the signs of Christmas indicate that Thanksgiving is near because the rapture of the church precedes the 7-year tribulation period, just like the Thanksgiving on the calendar precedes Christmas. So when I see Christmas trees going up and it's mid-November, I'm thinking I better get my turkey ready because Thanksgiving is coming, and that's the right way to understand this time period. The tribulation period is coming, the rapture is coming even faster, and that what a message that is to unsaved people. Get saved by trusting in Christ, so you won't be left behind. And then to save people, don't waste your life. You know, there's no guarantee that we're going to live out our full life expectancy. So whatever minimal time we have left, press into eternal things, and don't think that, well, I'll just take care of that next year, next month, next week, because any moment we could hear that trumpet and be in the presence of the Lord. And so I think that's the right way to handle these signs of the times, not just using them to satisfy curiosity, but these should have an electrifying impact on how we live.
Yeah. Amen to that, bro. And I literally have nothing to add. That is such a great way to look at things. We're living in the greatest time ever, and just looking to the future really helps us to gain perspective for how we're living in the present day. That's wonderful. Folks, I can tell you this. We both sincerely hope that you've enjoyed watching this or listening to it as much as we've enjoyed making it. We love you. We're grateful for the opportunity that you give us every single week to listen to us. On behalf of Pastor Andy Woods, this is James Kaddis. We want to thank you for joining us for another episode of Countdown to Eternity. God bless you.